In a suburban town near Los Angeles, California, people asleep in their homes were suddenly awakened by a series of gunshots and the cries of children in the middle of the night. A family tragedy was unfolding. How could a home that should have been filled with joy and warmth turn into a horrifying crime scene? Who was the person behind this brutal act? Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. Today's case involves a Chinese-American family, but with a slight twist. The husband was a Chinese-American who immigrated to the U.S. with his parents as a child. The wife, originally from China, had attended university and worked in her home country. Through the arrangement of his parents, this beautiful woman married her current husband and they had children together. However, behind the appearance of a harmonious family, a quiet crisis was brewing. When the wife's parents came from afar to visit, they had no idea this would mark the end of their lives. To understand the full scope of this case, we need to rewind back to 2016. The crime scene was located in West Covina, California, about 19 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. Around 8:30 p.m. on April 13, 2016, gunshots suddenly rang out on a quiet street. Several local residents who heard the shots called 911. One of them reported hearing more than 20 gunshots and the sounds of children crying and screaming, which sounded extremely distressing. Another resident said he not only heard gunfire and children's screams, but also knew the incident was happening in a neighboring townhouse across the street. He saw a man pacing back and forth on the second floor of the house before the man closed the blinds and turned off the room's lights. The police quickly pinpointed the crime scene based on the reports. A townhouse in the 1300 block of East Oahu Street. By around 8:55 p.m., two officers knocked on the door of the house. A man came downstairs from the upper floor to open the door for the police. However, during the conversation, the officers noticed something off about him. He appeared extremely frightened and was speaking incoherently. As a result, the officers called for backup, arrested the man, and handcuffed him. The officers then entered the house to investigate. One officer kicked down the door to the downstairs bathroom and discovered the children, trembling and huddled together in obvious shock. The youngest child had large red stains on both their body and pajamas. Other officers headed upstairs and found a woman at the top of the stairs near the master bedroom. Her body lay on the right-hand hallway outside the bedroom, showing no signs of life. She had been shot in the face, causing brain matter to scatter across the floor and even splatter onto the wall behind her. Police found a tooth and a spent bullet casing on the stairs leading to the second floor. Lying in the hallway nearby was an elderly man, his body covered in dried blood. Based on the shape and angle of the blood spatter, forensic experts concluded that the victim was lying on the floor when he was shot. 2 bullets were embedded in the hardwood floor beneath the body, while others, after passing through the victim, punctured the ceiling of the floor below. To the left of the man's body was a knife. Its position was odd, as if it had been deliberately placed there like a prop. Even stranger, in the midst of this bloody, gruesome scene, the knife was completely clean, without a single stain. The overall scene was both horrifying and bizarre. Next, the officers entered the master bedroom. Inside the closet, they discovered several firearms, including handguns, rifles, and boxes of ammunition, a small arsenal. Among them was a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, which had been fired 10 times and was now empty. A nearby spare magazine, also for 10 rounds, contained only one remaining bullet. Ballistics analysis later confirmed that this was the murder weapon. The crime scene was so horrific that even the officers were stunned. The man was swiftly taken to the police station for questioning. But what was the relationship between this man and the victims? What had happened that night? The man taken into custody was the homeowner, Caminero Wang. His wife's name was Diao Li. They had married in 2007 and had 3 children. The children hiding in the bathroom during the crime were their own, an 8-year-old daughter and 2 sons, aged 6 and 3. At the time of the incident, Wang's wife had been at work, narrowly escaping the tragedy. The elderly couple who were the victims were Diao Li's parents, Mr. Diao, age 60, and Mrs. Zhang, also 60 years old. In other words, it was Wang who brutally killed his in-laws. But what could have driven him to commit such a bold and horrific act? Why did he abandon everything and embark on this irreversible path? Police believe the motive for the crime may have stemmed from the couple's marriage. According to police investigations, Wang was born in 1972 as the only child in his family, originally from Chengdu, Sichuan province. His father was an aerospace expert at a university in Beijing, and his mother was a high school teacher. As a child, Wang attended school in Beijing. His classmates recalled that he was tall and skinny, with an introverted and timid personality. After moving to the U.S. with his parents, Wang studied at Pasadena City College in Los Angeles, later transferring to California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. This university isn't widely known internationally, but its local employment rate for graduates is much higher than some prestigious schools. Apple's first CFO, a former VP at Oracle, and Yahoo's CTO are all alumni. It was also ranked 14th among universities preferred by Silicon Valley tech employers, surpassing Cornell, the University of Washington in Seattle, and MIT. Wang majored in electrical engineering there. During his time at school, he developed a love for soccer and changed his name to Caminero in honor of his favorite Spanish player. His classmates described him as quiet and reserved. After graduating, Wang landed his first job at an observatory in New Mexico. The work at the observatory was quite monotonous, and because Wang wasn't great at socializing, he didn't make many friends locally. Gradually, he began to take an interest in guns as a hobby. Over time, his gun collection grew. Around the year 2000, after gaining some work experience, Wang moved to California and secured a job at Boeing as an engineer, working on military satellites with an annual salary of over $80,000, quite a lucrative amount at the time. 2 years later, Wang transitioned to Northrop Grumman, the fourth largest military equipment manufacturer in the world, as a test engineer, and his annual salary rose to about $100,000. It was arguably the peak of Wang's career. However, despite his career success, Wang's parents felt something was still missing. He was over 30 years old and still hadn't started a family. So, like many traditional Chinese families, Wang's parents began searching for a marriage partner for him. They reached out to friends and relatives, looking for a suitable single woman. They even returned to their hometown of Chengdu to find a wife for their son. Around 2005 to 2006, they introduced Wang to Diao Li, the daughter of a longtime family friend who was 9 years younger than him. Diao Li, born in 1981, graduated with a degree in nursing from Sichuan Medical University. After graduation, she worked as a nurse at Huaxi Hospital. Diao Li had fair skin and was tall, resembling her mother. Neighbors remembered her as a gentle, well-educated, hard-working, and quick-witted young woman. With her medical background and youth, if she could obtain a registered nurse license in the U.S., Diao Li's income wouldn't be insignificant. If she and Wang were to marry, it seemed like a good match, and their future life together promised to be prosperous and diverse. So, with their parents' matchmaking in 2006, after knowing each other for only a month, they registered their marriage in China. After the wedding, Wang returned to the U.S. to continue working, while Diao Li remained in China to apply for a visa, allowing her to live in the U.S. It took almost another year, but in 2007, Diao Li finally came to the U.S. on a marriage-based green card. The newlyweds quickly started their new life together. After arriving in the U.S., Diao Li lived with Wang's parents in El Monte, where his parents had bought a house. Initially, Diao Li attended a community college and later interned at a local medical center, obtaining her nursing license in 2011. In theory, both had decent-paying jobs, and their life seemed to be heading towards a bright future. However, Wang did not allow Diao Li to work. He insisted that she stay home, do household chores, and prepare to have children. Diao Li, obedient and without much complaint, followed her husband's arrangements and stayed home. Soon after, they had children, one every 2 years, and eventually, they had 3 children. This clearly showed that Diao Li was committed to making the marriage work. From the outside, everyone believed that the couple had a perfect marriage. However, while this marriage may have seemed like a good match in the eyes of others, in terms of age, appearance, and personality, Diao Li clearly had more advantages over her husband. She had a registered nursing license, while Wang, aside from having a good job, mainly benefited from being a U.S. citizen. It was apparent that this marriage was based on an exchange of benefits. A friend of Wang bluntly said, "This was a transactional marriage." As a result, their emotional foundation was fragile, and their understanding of each other was shallow. After marriage, Wang and Diao Li's life together wasn't as sweet or happy as it appeared. In fact, their relationship could be described as strained. Wang exhibited an extreme desire to control his wife, a level of control that was unsettling and, at times, frightening. He only allowed his wife to stay at home to take care of the household chores and their children. Wang managed all the family's finances by himself. Diao Li was only given a credit card for daily purchases, and every item bought or expense made had to be reported to Wang. Even when Diao Li communicated with her family in China via WeChat, Wang monitored her. His obsessive control over her was so extreme that, since he wasn't fluent in Chinese, he only allowed her to make voice calls to her family and forbade texting. Wang attempted to control his wife in these ways. If his control measures didn't work, he would become enraged and treat Diao Li even worse. The birth of their 3 children and years of living together did nothing to improve their relationship. Arguments became a daily occurrence in their marriage. These arguments didn't stem from typical marital conflicts, but entirely from Wang's inability to control his temper. He would fly into a rage at any moment, anywhere, for no reason at all. According to Diao Li, during each argument, Wang would shout profanities, mixing both Chinese and English, cursing humanity and the world itself. The worst part was that Wang often threatened to kill her parents in China and claimed he would make sure the police never found their bodies. Wang tried to tighten his control over Diao Li through these threats, but when he realized his wife wasn't falling under his control as he wished, he became even more unhinged. The root cause lay in his past romantic failures before the marriage. The fact that his marriage had been arranged by his parents only deepened his sense of inadequacy. Having been without a girlfriend for many years, Wang was acutely aware that in his marriage to the young and beautiful Diao Li, she hadn't married him out of love or attraction. Even Wang's parents and friends had subtly warned or hinted that he needed to keep a tight grip on his attractive younger wife. As a result, Wang resorted to controlling Diao Li within the narrow confines of their household. He believed that by doing so, he could keep her in line. However, this was far from the truth. Over time, Wang's verbal abuse escalated into physical violence. By this point, his actions had evolved beyond mere domestic abuse. However, Diao Li continued to endure Wang until a more serious incident of domestic violence occurred. In February 2013, Diao Li was sitting on the couch feeding their 6-month-old son. She asked Wang if he could wash the dishes. Wang angrily replied that he didn't know how to wash dishes. The argument escalated, and once again, Wang threatened, "I will kill your parents." This time, Diao Li had enough and shouted back at him. In response, Wang suddenly grabbed her by the hair and punched her hard in the left temple. Wang's father, seeing his son lose control again, immediately grabbed him tightly. Diao Li got up from the floor and called 911 to report the incident to the police. When the police arrived, they found blood on the floor, and Diao Li had visible injuries on her face. As a result, Wang was arrested. Not long after, Diao Li left the U.S. with their children. Before leaving, she demanded that Wang sell the house in El Monte, take half of the sale proceeds amounting to $100,000, and requested $2,000 per month in child support. At that time, Wang was in no position to refuse his wife's demands, as she used dropping the domestic violence charges as leverage. After selling the house, Wang's parents, disappointed and angry, returned to Chengdu. From then on, Wang found himself with nothing, forced to rent a place to live. His arrest record and being fired made it extremely difficult for Wang to find a job. Eventually, he ended up working as a test technician at a small company that produced military equipment. His annual salary plummeted from $100,000 to $40,000. According to Wang's friend, the domestic violence incident destroyed him. After the incident, Diao Li called her parents and said, "I want a divorce." Her parents advised her to think about their 3 children and try to salvage the relationship. Diao Li stayed in China for 2 years, living mostly with her parents during this time. However, Wang, despite being fired from his defense job, never showed up to apologize to his wife or bring their children back to the US. By the end of 2014, under pressure from both sets of parents, Wang and Diao Li began to consider reconciliation. When people brought up the subject, Wang coldly remarked, "If we reconcile, maybe Diao Li will bring back the $100,000 from the house sale with her." Diao Li struggled with her decision for a long time before deciding to return to the US. She realized that if she divorced Wang, she would have no job, no residency status, and would be raising 3 American citizen children on her own. The cost of living would be overwhelming. Ultimately, she also considered that her children couldn't keep up with the Chinese education system, where academic pressure was intense while schooling in the US was relatively easier. So she made the decision to return to America. From February to March 2015, Diao Li brought her 3 children back to the US. Finally, in July of that same year, they moved to West Covina and bought a new house, the very house where the tragic event would later occur. At first, Wang treated Diao Li well. She mentioned that he had a job, helped with some household chores, and was kind to the children. These basic improvements made her feel somewhat satisfied. But after about a month, Wang lost his job again, and they fell back into their old patterns, with the intense arguments resuming. By September 2015, in order to make ends meet, Wang helped Diao Li renew her nursing license and finally allowed her to work. However, Diao Li had no idea how much money she was earning, as all of her wages were deposited directly into a bank account fully controlled by Wang. She didn't even know the account password. It seemed like everything had reverted to the way it was before. So, was the tragedy caused solely by the couple's conflicts, or was there more to the story? As the investigation unfolded, more details emerged. With 3 children to care for and an unemployed husband, Diao Li had no choice but to find a job as soon as her nursing license was reinstated. Fortunately, the demand for nurses in the US was high. By September 2015, Diao Li had secured a job and started working 3 to 4 days a week. In a family without a mother present, a man left to care for 3 children on his own would undoubtedly struggle. Diao Li's parents, who adored their daughter and grandchildren, decided to come to the US to help support her and the family. With Wang's approval, Diao Li applied for a family visit visa for her parents, allowing them to stay in the US for 6 months. Thus, Mr. Diao and Mrs. Zhang arrived in the US in late 2015. Despite Diao Li having been married to Wang for nearly 10 years, this was the first time her parents lived under the same roof with their son-in-law. In the eyes of the neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Diao were a harmonious couple who got along well with everyone in the community. Back in China, they lived in a high-end residential area in Chengdu, where they were well regarded for their character and reputation. Although they were both over 60, Mrs. Zhang looked younger than her age. Mr. Diao was calm and skilled, while Mrs. Zhang was tall and elegant. This couple enjoyed a comfortable financial situation with a substantial pension. Besides their home in Chengdu, they owned a rental property and a vacation home in Hainan. It was clear that their retirement years were full of comfort, leisure, and abundance. The only concern for Mr. Diao and Mrs. Zhang was the international marriage of their only daughter, Diao Li. For 8 years, Diao Li frequently returned to China with her children, and nearly every time she had a baby, she stayed for an extended period. However, none of Mr. Diao's relatives or friends had ever met their American son-in-law. But the couple always seemed happy and explained that Wang worked in the defense industry, and jobs like that often involved secrecy, making it inconvenient for him to visit family in China. Mr. Diao and Mrs. Zhang were avid users of social media, but during their stay in the US, they never posted any photos of their trip or their family on WeChat groups. Even during festive periods like Christmas, New Year's, and the Lunar New Year, prime times for sharing photos, they made no mention of their son-in-law. The last WeChat message from Mr. Diao, although sent during his visit to the US, showed a picture of him and his wife traveling to an ancient town back in China. Originally, the couple had planned to return to China on April 19, 2016, but they rescheduled their departure to April 15th. Friends and relatives back in China were eagerly preparing to welcome them home. However, on April 14th, they received the devastating news that the elderly couple had died in the U.S. In Wang's testimony, Mr. and Mrs. Diao were portrayed in a completely different light. He claimed that he accidentally shot his mother-in-law during a struggle and that he shot his father-in-law in self-defense. Wang also stated that it was the unreasonable behavior and constant pressure from his in-laws that led to the tragedy. He recounted that on the evening of April 13, 2016, the night of the incident, Mr. and Mrs. Diao were preparing for their trip back to China. Around 6:30 p.m., Diao Li left for her night shift at the hospital, leaving her parents, husband, and 3 children at home. According to Wang, his father-in-law called him upstairs. Wang followed him to the second-floor bedroom where his in-laws were staying. They informed him that they intended to stay in the U.S. long-term. Wang objected, and an intense argument ensued. Wang claimed that his mother-in-law, Mrs. Zhang, started pushing him and verbally threatened to bang her head against the wall if he didn't agree to their demands. Wang believed this was a ploy to provoke him and then call the police to accuse him of domestic violence. He described how his mother-in-law rushed into the bedroom, grabbed a sharp kitchen knife and held it to her own neck, trying to force him to agree. His father-in-law then took the knife from her, pointed it at Wang, and stepped closer, saying, "I'm going to cut off your head." Feeling cornered, Wang said he threatened to call the police and have his father-in-law arrested, ensuring that he would never be able to return to the U.S. His mother-in-law fell to her knees, begging him. Wang told her that unless they packed their belongings and left immediately, never to return, he wouldn't forgive them. His father-in-law responded by saying they needed time to discuss it. Wang then waited in his own bedroom, but he noticed an eerie silence on the second floor. Growing nervous, he grabbed a fully loaded gun, opened the door to his in-law's bedroom, and walked in. As soon as he entered, his mother-in-law grabbed onto his leg. His father-in-law then charged at him, trying to wrestle the gun away. During the struggle, the gun went off, hitting his mother-in-law in the face. Wang claimed that, after his father-in-law came at him with a knife, he shot in self-defense. Due to the intensity of the situation, Wang said he emptied the entire clip. Later, when police knocked on his door, Wang explained to them, "I wanted to end it all, but I was still so angry. So I went back to the room, reloaded the gun, and shot a few more rounds at my in-laws." He also mentioned that he had thought about calling 911, but feared the police would scare his children. Although Wang's testimony sounded plausible on the surface, it was full of inconsistencies. In reality, according to Diao Li and those close to the family, it was clear that Mr. and Mrs. Diao were unhappy living in the U.S. However, to avoid straining their daughter's marriage, they rarely complained. In April 2016, tensions between Mr. Diao, his wife, and their son-in-law had escalated significantly. According to rumors, the conflict centered around Wang's unemployment. The Diao couple, already concerned about their daughter's international marriage, grew more worried seeing her shoulder the family's financial burdens alone. From Wang's perspective, his in-laws' behavior stemmed from their disdain for him. The growing friction culminated in a heated argument. Upon returning home, Diao Li's parents confided that Wang had threatened her father during the dispute, saying, "I'll make you disappear, and not even the police will find you." At the time, the elderly couple dismissed it as angry words, believing Wang would never be cruel enough to act on such a threat. They had repeatedly expressed their desire to return to China early and finally rescheduled their flight for April 15th. Wang was also aware of their early departure. It took the police less than 2 days after the incident to officially arrest Wang. The lead investigator in the case stated that they had no other suspects, as all the evidence and leads pointed directly to Wang. Forensic experts found a large amount of gunpowder residue on Wang's body. Additionally, the DNA on the murder weapon matched Wang's DNA. Autopsy results revealed that both Mr. and Mrs. Diao had been shot 12 times each, with most of the shots being fatal. One of the bullets had even entered Mrs. Diao's skull. This was clearly an act of excessive violence. Moreover, Wang did not have a single injury from any struggle. His claim that he shot in self-defense was clearly fabricated. According to forensic experts, both victims were likely conscious throughout the attack and were still alive when Wang fired the second round of shots. In addition, Wang's youngest son, who was only 3 years old at the time, had been with his grandparents when the shooting occurred. After hearing the gunshots, the boy went downstairs by himself and hid in the bathroom with his older sister and brother. His pajamas were covered in blood. Wang's oldest son had secretly gone upstairs, where he witnessed his grandmother kneeling on the floor, with Wang standing in front of her, yelling at her. Wang then forced his children to participate in a horrific game, making them watch as he shot their grandparents. Terrified, the boy ran back to the bathroom and heard another series of gunshots. Even when the police arrived, Wang remained upstairs and never checked to see if his 3 children were safe. More importantly, neighbors confirmed that from the time Diao Li left for work at 6:30 p.m. until the police arrived, no one else entered or left the house. All of this evidence clearly demonstrated Wang's brutal actions, and his defense fell apart under scrutiny. Due to the seriousness of the crime and its violent nature, the police initially set Wang's bail at a high $2 million, but later denied him bail altogether. Wang was detained at the local police station awaiting trial. On July 31, 2017, the Pomona Superior Court completed the preliminary hearing. The trial officially began in September 2018. After 2 years in custody, Wang appeared noticeably thinner. Dressed in a blue uniform, he continuously shook his legs after sitting down, but maintained a calm expression. Diao Li, along with Wang's eldest daughter and son, testified for the prosecution. On October 1, 2018, based on the overwhelming evidence, the jury found Wang guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. On January 2, 2019, the judge sentenced Wang to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Until the very end, Wang refused to admit guilt and was extremely dissatisfied with his defense attorney. After requesting a change in his public defender 4 times in 2020, Wang, through his lawyer, filed an appeal seeking a retrial of the case. Upon reviewing the defendant's appeal, the judge from the California Supreme Court ruled to deny a retrial. This time, the monster was permanently confined to prison. Though this brutal case has concluded, there are still people silently bearing the aftermath. Diao Li, who lost her parents, her youngest son, who witnessed the scene, and her 2 older children, who have been deeply psychologically affected. There is no recent information available online about them, but one thing is certain: this shadow will haunt them for the rest of their lives. This case highlights the significant issues surrounding convenience marriages that cross international borders. These marriages are often arranged with someone who already holds a green card in order to gain U.S. citizenship. On the surface, a convenience marriage might seem like a mutually beneficial transaction. However, due to the lack of emotional foundation, or even the absence of any real emotional connection, and the self-serving motivations of both parties, these marriages are at high risk of falling apart. Even without extreme outcomes like this case, reports of fraud, domestic violence, or a spouse seeking a more educated partner after immigration frequently arise. Therefore, it's essential to think carefully before entering into such a relationship, as it could lead to deep regret. That wraps up today's story. Do you have any thoughts on this case? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.